The U.S. and Iran traded fresh attacks over the weekend, with Washington announcing a third troop death in 2 days. Oil is higher on increased tensions in the Strait of Hormuz, with the IRGC Navy vowing not to allow any vessels to pass through without permission. Tehran says it will no longer adhere to the terms of the peace deal, while President Trump says the conflict is about ending Iran's nuclear ambitions.
This is a far bigger job that we're doing. We were doing a little job of stopping them from having a certain capability. Now we're just ending it. So it's really not the same thing. What we're doing now is we're ending any chance where they can have a nuclear missile.
Joining us now is Stuart Livingstone-Wallace, Bloomberg's executive editor for the Middle East, North Africa, and Russia. Stuart, thanks for joining us. What exactly did we see in terms of the intensity of these strikes over the weekend?
Yeah, good morning, Jennifer. So, I think there were some important developments. First and foremost, you had these attacks on what can only be described as civilian infrastructure in places like Kuwait, so specifically the power plant, desalination plant. That is a particularly concerning escalation in terms of what's going on the ground, because prior to that, they'd largely seemed to restrict each other to military targets. Now, that did happen as well, but that felt like a new departure there. Secondly, you had the death of US service personnel, both in Jordan and I believe in Kuwait. Again, that definitely ups the ante in terms of the escalation. Thirdly, you had what appeared to be an attack on Aqaba, which is right on that border with Israel. Now, Israel's largely kept itself out of this sort of most recent round of fighting, but that is quite alarming. If that it strays into Israeli territory, they will presumably be obliged to respond, and then that drags them back into the conflict, which is something I don't think any of them want. So all of that, some slightly worrying developments as we go in. As you say, that's the 9th day, and clearly we're anticipating a 10th day with no clear exit ramp for either side.
And we're seeing oil reacting off the back of it, moving on that. What does this mean then, Stuart, for the Strait of Hormuz and, of course, oil flows, which investors have been watching quite closely?
Yeah, and there's been a very interesting shift in market sentiment. And you can look at a few things. So let's take a look at the prediction markets. The odds, the prediction market was saying the odds of Hormuz returning to normal in terms of traffic by September the 1st was at 70% in mid-June. We're down to about 9%, 8%, something around there today. Basically a complete collapse in sentiment as this ceasefire has completely unraveled. And then secondarily, looking at the oil market itself, and you look at the forward curve, that is the cost of barrels going out months into the future, that has moved up right across the curve. So in other words, what that reflecting is sentiment right now. It's not really a prediction about future prices, but it reflects sentiment right now. Increasingly bearish, I think, about that supply coming back on with any sort of speed. And as a consequence, we're nowhere near the highs that we saw, say, in April or May, but we're definitely edging in that direction.
Yeah, and we see that reflected even today. Stuart Livingstone-Wallace, our executive editor for the Middle East, North Africa, and Russia. Stuart, thanks so much for starting us off. Let's get some more insight now with Niamh McBurney, director at Control Risks, and continue the conversation. Niamh, thanks so much for being with us. So we just heard there from Stuart, it's seeming like sentiment has really dipped as far as where this conflict is. It seems like the U.S. and Iran back to an all-out war. How do you assess this current moment?
So I'd call this current moment restrained, calibrated, although Kuwait and Bahrain's experience over the last week certainly won't have felt like that. We should see the events of the last 10 days in particular, going back to the end of the week before, as both sides trying to pressure each other on the components of the MOU that they each see the other as not following through on. That boils down to Iran's perception that it should be able to control the Strait of Hormuz, and there are clauses within the MOU that allow that. And then also America's perception of what it thinks is acceptable Iranian action and how Iran is implementing the MOU. This certainly is an all-out war yet, and really both sides are, although they're incrementally intensifying their activities over the last several days, and the attacks on water and power plants in Kuwait really bear that through. They are still leaving space to come back to the negotiating table. I know it doesn't feel like that, but we are still some way from the kind of hostility that we saw during the first several days of March. But is it possible that we move towards that? Yes. And it's still very difficult to see what will be the prompt that causes both countries to agree that this round of jostling is over and that they will go back to the negotiating table. So we're probably set for another couple of days of what we've experienced over the last 9 nights.
Well, Niamh, how much of a concern is it that we're seeing troops being killed? We have the President of the United States making comments around that. Do you see that not potentially being a catalyst for more escalation, potentially ground troops?
So, I mean, the fatalities on both sides are incredibly unfortunate. It is a consequence of war. It is, I think, probably quite shocking to a number of Americans because there have been relatively few American fatalities during this conflict. So it is disappointing and is concerning. It reflects ultimately a failure of certain systems and the effectiveness of Iranian aggressive systems as well. But merely because there have been deaths doesn't mean this is a catalyst for a ground operation. We have seen fatalities earlier on in this conflict, and they were not the prompt for that either. Ultimately, President Trump is far less inclined to engage in a ground operation of whatever sort. There's a couple of different options he could choose from, whether it's just targeting the island or whether it's mainland Iran. But analysis that our teams have done, as well as many in the policy community have done over the last couple of months, have affirmed it would be an extremely risky endeavor. And we still ultimately think at Control Risks that President Trump is much more inclined to go back to the negotiating table, even at this stage, than to engage in a significant escalation, such as some sort of ground operation. Is it still possible? Yes, there are many, many options that we need to leave on the table. But right now, as of today, we still think he's inclined to negotiate rather than to escalate.